forget the first time when I received negative feedback about a Preacher Girl episode. It was tormenting. The first time somebody said they didn't like it, or I got a thumbs down. Oh, it was crazy because we were so used to getting thumbs up on our videos that the first thumbs down was like a red alarm going off in the whole office. Even my brother was like, wait, did you see a thumbs down? And one of my producers was like, who would give you a thumbs down? I said, producers are really my buddy. But negative feedback is difficult to accept, and most of us can't accept it. In fact, I dare say that so many of us have lost friends, have lost coworkers, have had strained relationships because we just are not able to accept negative feedback. My name is Pastor Sharo, and I'm here to teach you how to accept feedback in a positive way. Whether it's negative feedback or positive feedback, how to become better at receiving feedback. In order for me to tell you what these three small things are, the first thing you must realize is that it is the most important thing, or one of the most important aspects of growth. If you don't receive proper feedback, you're never gonna grow. If you're around people that will constantly tell you what you want to hear and make you feel like everything is fine and right, and you are vehemently opposed to people criticizing or critiquing your work or a job that you've done, you will never have opportunity to get better, become better, and see things in a different way. However, there's no denying that once somebody gives you negative feedback, it feels like social rejection, doesn't it? Can you remember a time when somebody said to you, hey, I wanted to talk to you about what happened today in your project, or I wanted to talk to you about the meeting this morning. First of all my alarms start going off. Do yours? Like, do you instantly, when somebody says, can we talk about, can I give you some feedback on your presentation? Instantly, you start cold sweating because you're like, this can't be good. Well, there are two kinds of feedback, and there's that kind where somebody says, look, I want to give you some feedback, or then there is that monthly performance review where you sit and sweat. In my opinion, and actually studies, especially university studies, have shown that the companies where feedback is part of the culture, where receiving and giving constructive feedback is welcomed and recommended, these people have happier jobs, they have more successful and productive work lives. And that's why it's so important, especially in this era of social media, when everybody is online doing something, to be able to accept feedback. Now, there are three things that trigger feedback responses, and there are three major things. So when somebody comes to tell you something and you start feeling and emotionally getting attached to what they're saying, there are only three triggers that scientists have found generally that cause feedback to hurt the way it does. And the first trigger is called a truth trigger. Now, the truth trigger, it depends on whether what they're saying is true or not. So a truth trigger happens when somebody comes and tells you something like, hey, I think that maybe your presentation was a bit too lengthy. Keep it down. It might come over better if you kept it to 12 minutes because people's attention span isn't that long. Now, you instantly might want to get defensive and say like, well, did I bore you, or was it too long, or did you not understand what I was saying? You might be tempted to say things like, well, I needed to get all the points in and that's why it went so long. The inability to receive that by being offended or feeling like it's a personal attack on your personality prevents you from probably listening to something that is entirely true. Maybe the presentation is too long. Maybe that feedback is good feedback. But the challenge there, scientists call it the challenge to see. It's the challenge to see yourself properly, or to see what that person is trying to tell you. So in order to receive good feedback, girls, I think it would be great to be able to see yourself in another light and to see whether this person is speaking the truth or not. It's one of those things that if we asked ourselves before we got angry, is this the truth? And then instead of allowing that to cause us to become depressed and offended, we instead allow that to cause us to change and become better. So the second trigger for feedback is called a relationship trigger. Now, everybody knows that not all feedback is created equal. In fact, more important or more significant than what the feedback is often who is giving you the feedback. Am I telling the truth or am I telling the truth? So, for instance, if you're a preacher and another preacher comes to you and says something to you about, hey, maybe you're not using enough scripture, you might be tempted to accept that and say, you know what, the next time I'm going to start putting more scripture or basing my sermon more on the scripture. But if it's someone who doesn't even attend church, or somebody who doesn't even know the Bible, or somebody who you have judged in another way or form or fashion, and they come to tell you, well, you don't even use the script, you need to use a little more scripture. Who is telling you that is far more triggering and significant than what they're actually saying. Similarly, someone who doesn't cook telling you that your gumbo doesn't taste great would be very different, as if, per se, Bobby Flay was telling you that your gumbo could use some more salt. So it depends on who's giving you the feedback. Also, it's as significant as, maybe more, than what they're actually saying. So that's your second trigger. Who's giving you the feedback matters to you. And so here the challenge, the first one is a challenge to see, and the second one is the challenge of we. And they call it the challenge of we because feedback always occurs where the interaction between two people happen. So that's the second trigger. So science has actually proven, let me ask you a question, for instance, who do you think is the happiest person on an Olympic medal stand? The gold medalist, the silver medalist, or the bronze medalist? The gold medalist, right. If you said the gold medalist, you're absolutely right. They went there to win a gold and they won a gold. They achieved their dreams. They're the happiest. But who do you think is the second happiest? It's the bronze medalist. And the bronze medalist is happiest because they went there hoping that they would win a medal, and they medaled. They're just like happy to have medaled. The least happiest among the three is the silver medalist, because in their perception, generally the silver medalist is, I was that close to the gold. And that feeling, that feeling of just having missed the mark is so debilitating to a silver medalist that there's actually less joy in receiving the silver than there is in the bronze. That's a phenomena that has been really proven over thousands and thousands of athletes. But isn't that crazy? Because a silver medalist attacks their own identity because they're thinking a little bit more and I could have been a gold medalist. Well, the identity trigger in feedback is like that. If somebody says something like, your sermon was too long, or why don't you maybe try singing songs that are a little bit less high, maybe on a lower octave. So instead of hearing you have a beautiful voice that would suit a lower song better, you hear, oh, you're telling me that I'm screechy, you're telling me that I'm screaming, you're telling me I'm a bad singer. None of that actually happened, but when you feel attacked in your identity as a person, that could make feedback very, very painful. In many companies, in many churches, in many relationships, there's no feedback loop. There is no giving and taking of good advice and good feedback because people always take it as a personal attack. But if I could give you any advice about feedback, is seek good advice from good people. And good people is a very loose term that means people who you trust in the area that you're asking. Don't only ask your friends for feedback. Ask people that you know have done what you're doing, who do it better, and ask them what they can advise you. Now, this is what you don't do. You just don't go outside and say, do you have any feedback for me? Because it doesn't work like that. Instead, here is a really good question that one Harvard professor gave that I think is so fantastic. If you're looking for feedback from your peers, from your manager, from your pastor, whoever it is, here's a fantastic question they suggested. It is, ask them, what's the one thing that you see me doing or not doing that you think is getting in my own way of progressing or getting better? So you ask them, instead of saying, do you have any feedback, saying, and don't say, is there anything? Say, what's the one thing that you see me doing that I could do differently to help me be better? And Scientists say that generally people have a list. They have a secret list that they never really share or probably never even think about, but they'll be very forthcoming, especially family members. If you ask your spouse, what's the one thing that I can do that I don't do or that I need to stop doing that's going to make me a better wife or a better husband or whatever you are, and they'll be more than happy to tell you. And then if maybe they'll ask you and the feedback loop can continue. And also they say in a week later they'll come back and say, you know what, I should have said this instead, and they'll tell you another thing. And that can only really make you better if you accept what it is, if you make sure you ask the right questions. Do I see me like they see me right now? Do I see what that person is trying to say right now? 2, ask, what is my relationship to this person? Is this person in a position where they can accurately, or they should be able to give me feedback that I can use to become better, that I can use to change something for the better? And 3, ask yourself, is this person attacking my identity, or are they just attacking the job I did, or not attacking, but giving me suggestions to do a better job? Don't be afraid of a little bit of feedback. Don't be afraid of somebody saying it should have been a little shorter, or maybe a little more volume, or maybe you could have smiled a little bit better and I think you would have connected a little bit better. Now, the person who is given the feedback also needs to know what they're doing, and that's more information for another podcast, how to give good feedback. Today, it was really about receiving good feedback. So do not let your feedback feel like rejection. It is not social rejection. Now, all of that said, I really have to say this. If you're on social media and you do what I'm doing right now, be prepared for trolls. Be prepared for people who will give you tons of feedback that you didn't ask for. People will also give good feedback in there, but you must also be able to weed out the things that are not actually feedback. They're just insults. There is a difference. That's why identity is important. Make sure that who is giving you the feedback, they're known that to you, that you appreciate and value what they have to say. Even if you don't, though, when you listen to it, if you listen to it and you know that that does not apply to you and it will not make you better, it will just make you sadder, then shove it out the door. Because if it's not going to improve you, then it is not necessary in your life. But do try to take the positive feedback that people that care and people that want to see you do better at your job, in your church, in your family, people that want you to be better because they know you're able to do better. Take that and make what you do even greater and more successful. So ladies, I hope that this has helped you. I hope that somehow you will try to move past the fear of receiving feedback. Even if, you don't get pats on the back all the time. That's not healthy. It's not healthy to be in an environment where everything you do is always perfect. It's not healthy to be in an environment where you make yourself sick to receive feedback. You got to take some ibuprofen just before you go into a meeting because you're scared of what they're going to say. No, if somebody tells you something that, I think there should have been room for, there is some room for improvement there, perhaps you can try it this way. Your response can be something like, thank you for that feedback. I will definitely consider that and see if that's something I want to implement. I definitely want to listen to what you have to say. And don't immediately feel tempted to give them your own feedback because sometimes that's just retaliation. So ladies, I hope you remember those 3, the truth triggers, the relationship triggers, and the identity triggers. And when you get your feedback, ask yourself those questions. Ask yourself, do I see them? And do I see myself that way? 2, ask yourself, who is speaking to me? Is this person's opinion a valid and important one to me? And if it is, then listen. And 3, ask yourself, do I know who I am? Are they actually attacking my identity, or are they just trying to give me some really good advice? Some of the best things that I have done in ministry came because I had some really great feedback. Some of the best feedback I came from my brother, who, when I was just starting in ministry and starting to preach and stuff, I was so confused about who I preached like. I didn't know if I had to preach like my dad, or I had to preach like Joyce Meyer or some other female evangelist, or I had to preach like, some screamer or some yeller, or what like, am I a TD Jakes, or am I, and he told me this. He said, God showed you already the kind of preacher you are. When you were younger, you couldn't and didn't preach without an illustration. You do illustrated sermons. He said, why don't you do that anymore? And I said, because I feel like people think I'm joking, or they think that drama is just for children. And so I said, I stopped using illustrations. And he said to me, but it's who you are. I remember that day, and I went right back to where as long as I can think of one, I'm going to do an illustrated sermon. I'm going to preach that way, because not only do I get my point across clear, I feel like I have delivered in my authentic way when I do that. It was feedback. It was telling me how I was doing it wasn't the right way, or maybe could have been improved. And I thank God that I took it, because it made what I do on the pulpit so much easier, so much more enjoyable, and it gave God a different freedom to work through me in a way that I was preventing him from working when I was unwilling to do an illustration. So ladies, I hope this helped you. I hope that you are more open now to getting good feedback from people that care, and maybe pretty soon we'll learn how to give proper feedback. Don't you ever forget that if God called you, nobody can uncall you. There's some feedback for you, and you don't need a pulpit. You just need a message. See you next time.